me turn the mic off. Okay, now you should be able to hear me.
Why did we do that? Oh, from the.
Because we use this mic at church. Yep. Okay. So can you hear me now? To go back to the old Verizon commercial. Okay. All right. Well, good. So now, since I already said, unless you're a great lip reader, you probably didn't hear me say welcome to Roger and welcome to Deb. So welcome Roger and welcome Deb. And again, if anybody else is here and wants to leave comments in the chat area, I'll be happy to say welcome as well. And as we get started here, again, we're in John chapter 3, the latter part of John chapter 3 tonight. And as I get started, I'm going to ask you a question, see if you'll respond in the comment area. How many now, Roger, I know you've been planting, so I guess this counts, but how many of you have planted so far this year? Planted a garden, planted crops, whatever. Anybody done any planting yet? And if so, maybe what have you planted? Flower seeds. Anyone else done any planting so far? Okay. Well, with when we think about, well, that's planting a different type of seed. Absolutely, Deb. She says, put a new Bible in my grand's hands. Yeah, Roger. Yeah, Roger's going to win. Corn, beans, flowers, cabbage, onions, radishes, and lettuce. So, okay, there you go. You've been at this for a little bit longer this year, probably as well as overall. But one of the things about planting, and just to use those two examples of the seeds that Deb has planted, the literal seeds, obviously the spiritual seeds she mentioned there as well, but the literal seeds that she has planted, she's not expecting corn or beans or flowers or cabbage, well, flowers, I guess, and onions and radishes, etc. Roger, on the other hand, is not expecting to have the growth from what he has planted as to what Deb has planted. What we plant is what grows. And so, Deb, Deb says not expecting flowers either. Well, I mean, hopefully if you're planting flower seeds, I can't help you, but hopefully you get flowers if you're planting seeds. But, as I remember our first, the first summer that we were up here, 2011, and that August, right during the time of the Fairfax Fair, there was a huge windstorm, and on that, well, it was a decent sized rainstorm the Friday night as well. I remember running home in the rain, but the next morning we were headed to Maryville for something so we could get back, and okay, Marie's got her entire garden planted. Great job. But as we drove over that day, there were just massive amounts of corn that was laying over on its side. And one of the things when you plant is you cannot control certain things. You can't control the weather, for instance. Will there be enough water? Will there be enough sunshine? Will there be a nice balance in between the two? But we have expectations. Again, Deb may not be expecting flowers, but maybe she's hoping for flowers. Roger's hoping for a good crop, hoping for prices to respond as well. Marie and Ron are expecting some some fruit, so to speak, even if they're vegetables, some produce from their garden, and that's true for all of us. And so, if you've been watching my daily videos, one of the things that you might get the perception of, and it's a fair perception. I'm very intentional in how I go about life. I'm very intentional in what I do day to day. Uh, I you all know I've worked a Sabbath into my time. I'm learning to surrender to Sabbath, and how beneficial that's been. I wrote some about that last week's blog, and more about the blog that I post Friday on my blog site. But um, it's when we think about the different things that we have to do, whether you're very intentional or whether you have sporadic intentions, meaning, I need to go to the store today, and so you end up going. Um, we don't control anything, right? And when we think about gardens, and when we think about uh, crops, farmers are planting and stuff, when we think about the livestock that people like Roger have raised, we don't control any of that. We don't control whether an illness comes. We don't control whether the weather cooperates like we want it to. God's in control of all of that. And the same thing is true with this virus. And so, again, even in the aspect of living intentionally, which I believe is important, again, Jesus was very intentional, and I'll point out a couple of those things in just a moment. But uh, even in the midst of being very intentional, we have to realize that, well, ultimately, I'm not in control. Proverbs gets at this some. Proverbs 16 has a couple of different verses in it that talk about the fact that we make our plans and God directs our steps. Uh, James 4 picks up on that pattern, says, how can you say that you're going to do this or that? You're going to go to this city or that city. You're going to buy this, buy that. You should say, Lord willing. And so let that be an understood in my daily videos, that indeed I am intentional. Indeed, we should be intentional. We need to live that way, but it is with the understanding that if the Lord wills it. Because think about 2 months ago, we last met before this past Sunday. We last met as a church on March 15th. Today is May 13th, so this would have been the Friday before that Sunday. It was that Wednesday or Thursday when things really started to get up in the air. When major sports leagues are canceling their season or suspending their season at least, and none of us really knew what was going to be happening. And so, to think about all that's happened within the last 2 months, and we have no control. Susan and I were talking earlier today that there's a lot of conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff, but and there's a lot of blame that goes around. But one of the real challenges is that it is very easy to play armchair quarterback, or Monday morning quarterback. And there are decisions that have been made, and I would say that some of the decisions have been made, could have been made earlier. Some of the decisions that were made seem wrong now. But when you're in the process of making decisions and you don't have all of the data, I mean, what have we learned in the last week or so? COVID toes. Who knew? That this was a respiratory illness. And now it's causing inflammatory issues everywhere. So making the best decisions you can at the time, but especially in those early days of March, early days of our acquiring the virus, meaning mid-March to late March, you could make a decision in the morning that could be completely wrong 2 hours later or 6 hours later. And so, as we think about all these things, we must understand that, again, we're not ultimately in control, and God is. And so I want to read for us from John chapter 3, because one of the things that we can gain from this particular bit of scripture is that there are many people that try to bring things upon themselves. There are many people that try to be famous. There are many people that want the stature, that want, hey, all of this, whatever it is. Um, but normally it just happens. I mean, John the Baptist never sought those things. He was out baptizing. He was, if he wanted the glamour, he probably could have had it. His parents, right? We know from Luke, were prominent people. Taking care of the temple and stuff. His dad, doing those kinds of things. So he could have had a prominent place. Instead, he goes out and lives in the wilderness, and instead of eating the fruits of the land, he's eating locusts and honey, not dressing in the nice robes with the phylacteries and all those kinds of things. But he was very prominent. And yet the focal verse that I want to get to tonight is John 3:30, in which John speaking says, he must increase, but I must decrease. I mean, those 7 words are so powerful. So let me read for us from John chapter 3, verses 22 through 30. And again, if somebody else has joined us and you want to say hi, jump in the comments and I'll say hi to you when I'm done with this. So beginning in verse 22, after this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with him and was baptizing. John was also baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized, for John had not yet been put in prison. Now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who is with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him. John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore his joy of mine, Therefore this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. Now again, John wasn't looking for any kind of prominent position. It was given to him, and yet at the proper moment, he knew it was time to step aside. And that's a lesson for us all. I mean, John was very intentional about what he did. He was very intentional about being in the wilderness. He was very intentional about preaching repentance. He was very intentional about challenging the leadership. He was very intentional in everything he did. And yet he was also intentional in saying, this isn't my party, it's his. And so there's a good word for us in that we need to do our part. We need to be intentional. We need to live our lives in a way that is purposeful and at the same time glorifying to God, and hopefully purposefully glorifying to God. But as we do those things, recognizing who is indeed in control. It's like God said to Job, where were you when I created the foundations of the earth? Were you there when I created this, or when this happened? And of course, Job just sat in silence. And that's all we can really do. After 30 some chapters, God shows up in 38. Really, Job's part stops about 31 when Elihu shows up. But for 31 chapters, there's this dialogue between Job and his friends of, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, because Job wasn't in control. We need to remember that. So again, living intentionally, but doing those things. So let me share it this way. One of the things that Andy Brams has learned during this time is the fact that, even within all the intentionality, John positioned himself for someone to come along to do greater things. And so what can I do to help somebody else to do greater things? And again, as I mentioned in my Monday video, the teaching aspect is so important to me and everything, but what am I doing now? How am I living now that will help somebody to eclipse Andy Brams, whether that's in Fairfax or somewhere else? That's not up to me. Even Jesus said that you will do greater things than I. And he did that because he said that because he knew he was leaving. And instead of being one person in one place at a time doing something, there would be 12 or 70 or 500 that were out doing other things at other places at other times, even after he had departed this earth. And so, in order to have others do more, that means sometimes we need to do less. And so that's a part of the lessons that I'm going through in as I think about intentionality at this point in time, that how do I need to be intentionally less? How do I need to decrease in order that others might increase, that ultimately Jesus might increase, as we're going through life, as we're going through this situation, whatever. And so, again, that's a part of what I'm learning. There's a great statement that was made. I believe it was Ignatius, who the Roman Catholics have as a saint, but He once said, "Act as if everything depends upon you. Trust or pray, as it's often been interpreted, as if everything depends upon God." And I think that is a great word for us. Act and live intentionally. Do what we need to do as if everything depended upon me. But really trust that trust in knowing that everything truly depends upon God. So that's our little devotion for tonight, little study for tonight, and I will turn it over to questions. I do have a couple of things that I want to say. This not for tonight necessarily, but for subsequent weeks. I know that that when I'm done with this part, about 6:45 or 6:50 each week, we answer questions, and sometimes there's a few questions, and then oftentimes we just sit without anything for a while, and it's really awkward. So, one of my thoughts is not necessarily tonight, since we didn't say it beforehand, but we'll probably stop these videos about 7:15 each week, unless there are questions coming, and then we'll go to 7:30. That's absolutely fine. But to just kind of sit with that awkward silence, um, I don't think that's a healthy way to go about it. So again, I'll be happy to take questions and um, see where our discussion leads us tonight. I do have a couple of things that I will share before we sign off, a couple of announcements to share at that point. So any thoughts or questions that you all have?
There's one.
Okay, Deb says, do you think God is in control when people are taken out of your circle or friends due to a conflict? I mean, the easy answer is God's always in control, but I'm not going to be that cliche. Um, I do think that there are times that we run people out of our lives, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes even unknowingly, by our response to them, by their perceived response from us. We all know how that goes, that sometimes somebody will say one thing. Well, let's turn the tables. If somebody has done something to you that they didn't know bothered you, and uh, you've been mad at them for years, and you've been the one trapped, you've been the one imprisoned, right? Because they don't know anything's wrong. They just know, hey, you stopped talking to me, and whatever. And so um, until we go to them, and I believe this is one of the reasons why Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, if you think somebody has a problem with you, go to that person. Because if they do have a problem with you, Jesus says they're going to put you in prison. So deal with it before it gets that far. But do you think that God is in control when people or within your circle are removed? There's multiple layers of circles, the concentric circle approach, and this is true in so many aspects of life, from a leadership perspective, but also from a personal perspective. You have your inner circle, and what that inner circle is would be those whom are most trusted. So that's your family, that's your spouse. In a church, it's leadership, whatever. Then you have the next a close group of friends. You have from a church perspective, this would be core people within the church, not necessarily the inner team or maybe even a staff or whatever, but core people. Then you have another layer out, and those would be they're acquaintances from a personal perspective. They're people you run into at the store, you see around town. You're not having people over for dinner. You might call them occasionally, might text them occasionally, but you're not that close. Again, from a church perspective, this is the congregation. So you have in a church, you have your inner leadership team, you have a core group of people, and then you have the congregation, and then the outer circle, that's just everybody else, and that can even expand into other circles. But you think that about that rock dropping into water and how those circles begin to expand. So these are community people. They might be people you see at a ball game. They might be people that um, even from an extended perspective, you see on the news. Um, People in the White House are our extended people, right? Or at the national levels of government. Um, and for a church, that would be the community and beyond. So the the sometimes that removal isn't necessarily a removal of the person altogether. It's a moving out in those circles. Um, that those who are closest to us at one point become a little bit more distant to us. And oftentimes, what that means is that there are other people in an outer circle that are beginning to come inward. It could mean that we're, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but it could mean that we're aging, that we just don't have as much capacity for other people. There's been a study done, and I don't remember the source of the study, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but I want to say that the statistic is none of us can really have more than 20 really true relationships in our life, and that's defined as knowing the person's name, knowing their birthday, knowing the children, all those kinds of things. We really can't know more than 20. Now with computers, yeah, we have, or with address books, we have their address, we have birthdays and all. But I mean, to really keep it up here and to intentionally be with somebody all the time, if we add a 21st person, then the 19th person was moved aside. And so, as people come and go in our lives, as the ebb and flow of life happens, I think that's a part of it. And conflict, going back to the question, conflict is a great contributor to that. I don't mean great in a good way. I just mean a significant contributor to that, because again, typically when we have conflict with one person, sometimes that's because of time, that's because of energy, and sometimes that's because somebody else has moved into our life. Um, Maybe it's a new job, and you have to adapt, and a new boss, or maybe you're the boss of new employees or whatever, and so some of those other priority relationships shift away, and that causes problems. So, I mean, that's a multi-layered question, but I think just in a general sense, I hope I've done it justice in that regard. Roger says, and so Deb, if I've missed something on that, let me know. Let me see what Roger said here. Should aid us in how we view others and what we are doing. When should we stop prodding them or us to do more? When do we let others do? Um, one of the principles, I think I've shared it on here before. Maybe it was on one of my videos that I'm doing daily. But um, when other people can do something 80% as well as what we do, we should stop doing it. There's a thought process that you do what only you can do. In fact, Mother Teresa, I think this is going to be in my message Sunday. I'm trying to remember where I wrote this down. I've got all these, daily messages and this, and I'm trying to keep them all straight. Mother Teresa said, "You cannot do what I do, and I cannot do what you do, but we can do great things together." How true is that? There are things that each one of you listening to this tonight can do that I have no clue. I'm trying to think. I know I've done a garden before when I was really young. I don't think I planted a flower in my adult life. Okay, so going back to Deb's statement, I could put seeds in the ground, but I would have no expectations of them coming forth either. It's not a part of who I am. And yet, I know people will look at me and say, well, I can't talk like that. I can't teach like that. And I'm not the world's most gifted teacher. I understand that. But we all have different capacities. We all have different things that we can do. And so, like Mother Teresa said, there's things that you can do that I can't. There's things that I can do that you can't. but imagine what we can do together. And when Paul writes in I'm tipping my hand for Sunday, when Paul writes in Romans 12 about what we can do, and when Peter writes in 1 Peter 4 about what we can do, imagine what the church can do together. Imagine what we as leaders and Christians in general can do if we combine our efforts rather than saying, I'll do this alone. So to kind of cap that part of the thinking, um, when we find that somebody else can do something pretty well, it's probably time to allow them to attempt it to do it on their own. And as I've shared before, that's the model that Jesus used. You know, he showed the people how to preach. He showed them how to cast out demons, and then he said, "Do it." And they did it. They were amazed that they could do it. Could they do it as well as Jesus? I'm going to argue no. But then it was time for Jesus to say, "Okay, goodbye." And within a 3.5-year period, he equipped every one of his followers to do what they didn't think was possible. Now, we know at least one that chose not to continue to do it, but he equipped them all to be. I mean, we don't have any record of the other disciples coming to Judas and say, "Man, you shouldn't even be here. You can't cast out demons." We have no record of that. And I don't believe that would have been true. Um, it's just that he chose not to. And again, maybe he intentionally chose not to, but there wasn't intentionality in his living. So, um, what can I do? Let me just turn this back in on the church. What can I do that no one else in our church can do? What am I called to do that no one else in our church is called? It's not preaching. Every one of us is called to preach. Every one of us is called to teach, to lead others. Now, I should be primary in that. I should set the example in that. Obviously, I have education in that. But what I am called to do is to lead the church. And so, not that others can't lead, not that I don't. I mean, Roger and I texted for a half hour this morning about some things. But in the context of this, ultimately, I realized that those decisions have to go somewhere. And was it Roosevelt that said the buck stops here? So that's that's what I'm charged to do, and so that's why I don't preach every week. Now this year, for a good long time after we're back, I'm going to be preaching most weeks, just because I think it's important after this challenge it's moving behind us. How far it'll move behind us, it's hard to know. But I think people need to see me. I think people need to hear from me more than not on Sunday mornings. Truman, thank you, Roger. But that doesn't mean that other people aren't going to preach and aren't going to teach and aren't going to lead, because I think that's a part of the development. And Roger, not that he didn't do it before we came, but with Roger having that opportunity here prepared him to do things in Kenya, for instance. So that's what I'm really aiming towards, is just to help develop people in order to do things that perhaps they didn't think. Because I promise you, what was it, 2001? I did not think that I was going to be able to teach. And I've told you all before, back in 1988, 89, as a sophomore in college, I think it was, when I was scared to death to talk in front of people. Well, I got over that. So anyway, okay. Deb says, like the 20-person explanation with 17 in our immediate family group, it doesn't leave much room for others. God places 17, so I guess he's controlling it. Yeah, and again, people don't understand. Why don't you have time for me? Why can't you give more to me? Well, Jesus had 12. Right? I mean, yes, there were. Luke 10 says there were 70 or 72, depending upon how the ultimate wording was. He appeared to 500. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that. But Jesus had 12, and let's face it, he had a difficult time managing those 12. He was always breaking up conflict of those 12, and he had 3. Not just the 12, he had 3 that he intimately invested in. And so, that's one of the things, and you all are going to hear about this. Spoiler alert: starting in June, I'm going to be talking about elders, because I'll tell you, one of the most challenging things that I am dealing with right now as a leader of our church is there's some decisions that we need to make, and how do we make them? We can't meet together. Um, the bandwidth thing on Sunday, that is going to be an increased expense. We need better bandwidth in the church. We are not going to be able to do live streaming at the church, period, from that building, period, until we get um, better internet connectivity over there. Well, that is not a one-time expense. That is a continual expense. That has to come before the church. When is the church going to have a business meeting again? Okay, so one of the things I'm going to be talking about, and we've been studying it for a year on Wednesday nights, but not a lot of people didn't get involved in those studies. So I'm going to bring it to the congregation, and we're going to talk about it on what used to be Hub Sunday. I'm going to adapt that to Elder Sunday, and we're going to talk about elders because, like I said earlier, I communicated with Roger a lot, and Roger and I communicate a lot, but we really need to consider elders, because what if this happens again next year? What if next year it starts in October and we can't meet until April? How do we function as a church? And I'm being real. Okay. I'm not worried about that. God is in control. Okay. That I'm concerned about the prospect. We have to plan for that prospect, but I'm not up in arms over that. Okay. That doesn't concern me. But what does concern me is the ability to um, make decisions as a church, because the way our church is set up, really, I have no authority. I mean, I can't vote in a business meeting. So what authority do I have, even though I lead the church? In a sense, I don't have that kind of authority. So is that right? Those are some of the things that we need to look at and uh, have discussions on. So that'll be a part of our last Sunday of each month going forward. But going back to Deb's statement, when we have so many people already in our lives, for us, closest to us, it would be five. Susan, myself, and our three kids, including Sam as our son-in-law. Our parents. Yeah, all of a sudden. So as the elder of our church, as the shepherd of our church, I already have 10 people in my life, and our church has how many people? And so, well, you didn't call me, you didn't visit me, and it's not that I don't think about it. Sometimes there's time issues. I was very thankful. I made a call today that I've been overdue in making. Again, we've been able to visit, everybody a couple of times over this, and we will continue to do that, probably more sporadically, especially if we're able to start getting back together more often uh, at the building. But the reality is that, again, Jesus had 12. That was his concentration. And I'm not saying I should limit myself to 12, because that's not what church is, but that's where those concentric circles build, because ultimately, if we go from a me mentality to a we mentality, then what happens is I invest in, let's say, five or six others who invest in five or six others who invest in five or six others. And then that care is more personalized, rather than, hey, has anybody seen so and so lately? I don't even know if I've seen them. Other people are checking. Of course, that's the way our deacons are set up, et cetera. And so, that model needs to be worked as most effectively as it can. So, anyway, hopefully that answers all of the questions in that little strain of thread. Any other thoughts or questions? You're welcome. Now here's here's the caveat for all of us, right? Sorry, Deb. Here's the caveat for all of us. It's not an excuse not to love.
No, what?
And this is a challenge for me because I'm task oriented. As I talk about intentionality and everything, but that's not an excuse not to love. And of course, that was my video from earlier today. that we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. So just to use Deb's example, since she shared the number 17 here, if number 26 comes along, she says, I don't have time for you because I've already got my 20. That's disregarding Christ's command to love our neighbor as ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to give our full investment and full attention to that person. It just means that in that moment, we can choose, and we must choose to take time to love that person for what they need and then move on. I mentioned earlier I was going to talk about Jesus, and I didn't do this. So this is a good time, good place to come back to it. And I've mentioned this before, but I really want us to center on this for a moment. Jesus didn't help everybody that he could have helped. Mark chapter 1 is a classic example of this, where on the Sabbath, that evening after the Sabbath, pretty much the whole town of Capernaum came to him and said, heal us, well into the evening. And the next day he got up very early, Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark. Jesus got up, he went off to a solitary place to pray. And verse 36 says that Peter and others were looking for him. Where is he? Right? Which means people are back. You sent him away last night so you could get rest. Okay, Jesus, that's fair. You need rest. But now it's time to get up and help people. Where are you? And Jesus says, I'm talking to Dad. And you know what? We can't do any more good here, so let's leave. So he left. He just left. There were other people that came to Jesus and wanted to be healed in some way, or wanted confirmation in some way, like the rich young ruler. I know I shared this here recently as well. The rich young ruler, I've kept all these commandments. And Jesus said, yeah, but have you? What about that issue of coveting? Go sell. Now, again, this isn't for all of us to go sell. This is to a man who was dealing with coveting and didn't realize he was dealing with coveting. Jesus said, here's your issue. Go sell everything and then come follow me. And the man wouldn't do it. And Jesus didn't get down on his knees and say, oh, please, 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 I need your money. Please, I need you to follow me. He just let him walk away. So, in the moment, Jesus loved that man enough to give that man exactly what he needed. And in that moment, what that man needed was a challenge. And the man walked away from the challenge, and Jesus said, okay, I'll let you go because that's really what you want. On Holy Week, I'll get to that in a minute, Deb. But on Holy Week, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, they were attacking Jesus, and Jesus never attacked back. He challenged them greatly, and at the end of that said, and they didn't know what to do, so they left him alone for a while. Of course, then the plot to kill him became even more intensified. Okay, and Deb says, but loving doesn't require me to cater to someone who is rude. Others does. Catering is not necessarily love, right? And Dobson wrote the infamous book, Sometimes Love Must Be Tough, or I don't think sometimes that love must be tough, whatever. That doesn't mean being tough as a jerk, because we all know that we can do that, right? Just leave me alone and move away. But sometimes people will seek to abuse us, seek to abuse that love, and of course this is where Christians get in a lot of hot water, because we're told to turn the other cheek, and so people think that they can push us, they can abuse us, they can manipulate us. Jesus was never manipulated. Again, talk about intentionality. There's never been a person on this earth more intentional. And when people were rude, when people were rude to Jesus, he still loved them. I mean, think about the cross. Think about all of that. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we have to go through. I'm not saying that that's what Jesus has for us. But Jesus was not rude in turn. Now, we might say calling a group of religious leaders a brood of vipers was borderline rude, but it was also very, very truthful. There's certain things that Jesus did. I'm thinking, man, if it was anybody else but Jesus, I think that would probably be a sin. Turning over the tables in the temple, yeah, but okay, it was Jesus. Righteous anger, as Susan said. But no, we don't have to cater to their whims, because but here's an opportunity actually, as we think about this. When people come to us with a need, oftentimes they come to us with what they think is their need, not with what their real need is.
Come to us.
And so if we take the time to listen, we don't have to give them anything, and still we can still help them. Hey, can I have X? Will you do Y for me? Whatever it might be, and you uh, and you say, you know what? Let me just listen. And sometimes just listening helps them to discover that greater need. They come to you for $20, and uh, what they really needed was somebody to challenge them, that you don't really need the $20 for what you think you need the $20 for. Okay, just to be a dumb example. And a biblical example of this is found in Acts 3, when Peter and John are walking past the temple, and the man is laying there, and he says, hey, can you give me some money? And silver and gold will buy none, but I'll give you what I do have. In the name of Jesus, get up and walk. I've got the power of Jesus within me, which, by the way, is the same power that you and I have within us. And I will give you that. And so they did not give the man what he thought he needed. They gave him something greater. And so, absolutely, we don't need to cater to someone, especially when they're rude to us. And if they become offensive to us, I think it is okay for us to walk. I think we should walk away. Again, Jesus walked away at times from those situations, but not before he heard them. He gave them an opportunity, but when the offense came, except obviously at the end, and that was preordained, that was destined. He had to go through what he went through with Pilate and the Romans and the Jews and all of that on Holy Week. But yeah, I think that when people begin to manipulate and everything, I'm sorry. I've tried to listen. I've tried to help. I'm just turning away. Well, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. Well, I am. I'm turning around, and you can see the other side. As I walk away. I don't think that's what Jesus. I don't think that's what Jesus meant. But there's a reality that we are going to turn away, and essentially that's what they're saying. When it slap you on one cheek, slap on the other. But it's. People are going to manipulate. People are going to
stay there and have your cheek slapped back.
Yeah. He didn't say allow this to happen. He just, hey, one time. And by the way, one of the most challenging things for me as a minister, when people come and are asking for things, and I'm not saying church people, I'm saying community people. I don't see anywhere, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't help multiple times. I'm not saying that, but I don't see anywhere in the Bible where Jesus helped people multiple times, apart from, say, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, obviously. So that's turn the other cheek. That may not even be at the same moment. It could be over a period of months or years even, but after twice, I don't know. That's a hard one for me. When people come over and over and over again, I'm like, I just don't see Jesus helping people in the same way, if at all, multiple times. So, yep, you got me talking again. That's a good thing. You're welcome. Any other thoughts or questions? So hopefully somebody's typing. Yeah, I can forgive, but walking away is my choice now. Yeah, and that's the other part. Just because we walk away, somebody might get extraordinarily upset and angry with us for walking away, but that doesn't mean that we haven't forgiven. They may not know that. I mean, we should say that. We should be authentic with that. Hey, I forgive you. I hope you forgive me if there's an offense that I've created. But it's time to walk away, because some relationships are toxic, and we just have to move away from that. So, if anybody has any thoughts or questions, put them there. Let me just cover two things for sure, and I'm gonna give something that I'm thinking about that I still haven't gotten a confirmation call on. I was hoping to get it today, mentioned in my video earlier. Number one, we are going to be doing a prayer walk this week. And I think somewhere I said or wrote the wrong times earlier this week. So let me just clarify that. On Saturday morning, 9 a.m., we'll meet at the church just a few minutes before 9, have a little time of corporate prayer, social distance prayer, and pray together. And then we will walk around the town, depending upon how many people come. And please, anybody that's listening now, and invite others. That's great. That's wonderful. And we're just going to walk around the town, walk down the streets, stop by a house and pray as we go by each side of the street, whatever. So that will happen from 9 to approximately 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. And then it will happen again Sunday evening from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. So we will not be having this. This is a time of service, which Sunday's message is about serving. Ultimately, the Mother Teresa quote that I gave earlier. So this is an opportunity for us to serve, not meet as we would ordinarily meet on Zoom or whatever. Okay, so that's 5 to 7 on Sunday evening. The second thing is, if anybody would like to give towards the roof, if you recall, the Wednesday before our last Sunday together, we did have our first quarter business meeting, and we did vote to give towards the roof. And I don't know where we are. I know we got a gift on that last month, at least one gift on that last month. I don't know where we are exactly in the overall amount of that. I know we have enough money because we did take out the PPP loan that will turn into a grant as long as we follow the right procedures on that. So again, we didn't take out any debt as a church, but that money will be used for paying salaries, and then the income that we, the tithe and offerings that we've got will supplement the other. But this is an opportunity to build up savings and stuff. And I thought honestly that we might be getting close to that. Originally, Greg had told me that they wanted to do it in July when it was warmer because everything would stick better and it would be better. But this morning, there's a trailer over in our parking lot right now that has a porta potty on it, and it was still there when we came down just a little bit ago. So I don't know whose it is because I talked to Greg, and Greg said no, they're not coming for a while yet. So if anybody knows whose that is, let me know. If it's there Saturday, I'm making a phone call because it's not going to be there Sunday. I'll say that much. And it may already be gone tonight. I don't know where it came from. It was not there at 6:30 a.m. It was there by 8:15 a.m. this morning, and I was downstairs in the meantime. So I don't know. So those are two things, again, giving, and you can give online now. Go to our website, fairfaxmobaptistchurch.org, and click on the give button, and you can give securely. There's all kinds of options there. I think the roof fund is probably on there. I checked through it all the other day, but I've forgotten what was there. But thank you, Roger, for getting all that set up. And then here's the thing. If you watched the video earlier today, I hinted at. I've talked to a couple of people in our church about this. Two board members that, and I guess if you had my wife, that would make three. Although she didn't really comment on it, but that seemed in favor of this. We did have a healthy offering in April. I don't want to, be flippant with money. I want to be good stewards of money, but we still need to serve. We still need to have opportunities to serve. And so I have a call into the hospital, and I've not heard back, but I would like for our church to provide a meal to everyone at the hospital and first responders within the county, ambulance and law enforcement, et cetera. Because, as we hear over and over again during these last 2 months, they're the real heroes, especially those that are, working the tent outside the hospital and everything like that. And I know we've been very fortunate not to have some of the issues that are happening in so many other places within our country, but it would be a way for us to show our appreciation. And so the logistics of that, first off, I need to find out how many. So I'm waiting. Like I said, I made a call this morning, have not heard back yet from the contact at the hospital on that. So once I get that, then we need to figure out a menu. And I realize that money is going to be more of an issue for some than others, and that's fine. So what I'm proposing, and this is why I talk to the board of directors, and once I hear back from the hospital, I'll contact the rest of the board of directors. Is anybody who wants to make something and just donate, great. If anybody says, well, I would make something, but I can't afford it, the church will buy the ingredients. Whether that's meat, I don't know. This is gonna take a lot of logistical work to figure out who's making what, how much we need, and all of that. But as board of directors, we can authorize up to $500 for any expense. But I think a mission-minded expense, and I don't think it'll be that much, but a mission-minded expense when we're not probably doing much mission work this year. I mean, I know we're not going overseas anywhere this year, obviously. So that's a way for us to give back to our community, to show appreciation for those who are on the front lines. And we know, obviously, of 2 times that they really were on the front lines, at least. So anyway, that's a mission idea that I was thinking about the last couple of days and want to put into practice. But I'm just waiting. One of the questions that came up, which is a very valid question, is where would we do it? I think if the hospital would allow, and I understand why they might not, we would just put it in their meeting room, just past the entry desk, and allow them to come do it. Whether we may not serve, we may just leave the stuff. I don't know. Otherwise, we could do it at the community room, or just a couple of thoughts that I had towards this end. But again, that's not as ideal because they would have to leave the hospital to come back, but they may not want anybody else in the hospital. So I'll just leave that in their hands. And as soon as I hear back from the hospital, we'll be making contacts, probably by text, and then trying to determine how to move forward from that. So you can be thinking towards that end. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions that you all have? Those were the 3 things that I wanted to cover from an announcement perspective. I said much earlier, I'll repeat it now, because this is kind of where we are at the moment. First off, I can't see if somebody's typing. So if you are typing and I start talking, just finish your thought because I'll get to it. But if we get past the 7:15 mark in subsequent weeks, as long as we're doing this approach, which uh, might be a long time, then once we get past the 17:15 mark, if there's no more questions or comments, we'll probably just cut it off there rather than just waiting for 7:30. But for tonight, we'll go to 7:30 at least. Again, if there are comments and questions that are still happening past the 7:15 mark, then we will certainly cover those. So. Any other thoughts or comments, questions? Anyone have any feedback on the idea of providing a meal for the hospital? Okay, Deb, registered. And as a person on the board of directors, I'll still call for confirmation once we know more. But um, since you're on the board, that's a third person. I think we have 9 people on the board. I was, I hope jokingly, how it was a joke, chastised on Sunday after the first service, and then lo and behold, I forgot it on the second service as well. So if you watch the recording or listen to the recording on Sunday and you did not hear me say Happy Mother's Day, Happy Mother's Day. I did not. I just, with everything that was going on that morning, it slipped my mind. I did not say it. One of the mothers on the way out said, "You didn't say that," and so I said it belatedly after the service, with the intention of saying it during the second service, and thankfully Roger bailed me out. So thank you, Roger, for offering that up in the second service, because yeah, it was just such a different day. Um, yeah, it was a good day. Good day. Very different. Okay. Well, no other comments or questions that I'm seeing at this moment. So let's take time to close, and I'll just remind us where we started about, allowing Jesus to be increased in our lives. Again, I think it's important for us to have purpose and to try to live our lives accordingly, to live our lives the way He would want us to. That's a part of the follow me and I will make you. He wants to do something in us and through us and with us. And so as we do those things, we will live with more purpose and um, with more of an ability even to serve Him. But as we do that, we always must remember that He's the maker, and we're the we're the we're what He uses to accomplish His will. So let's close in prayer. Father, we do thank you for your love, and Jesus for showing us that way. And God, we're thankful for the words that you have included in the Bible to give us encouragement and to challenge us and all those, but also, God, to give us an example, like John the Baptizer is in so many ways, as the one who prepares the way for the Lord. And God, in a sense, that's what we are doing right now, not with the same. Uh, not with the same level of importance, not with the same prophetic aspect like John filled, but Jesus is coming again, and so just as John was teaching and preaching about the one who was to come, now we are the ones who are teaching and proclaiming the one who has not only come, but the one who will come again, and that being Jesus. So God, let us do our part. Let us take our portion that you have given to us, and have that influence. Those 20 people, especially that we talked about earlier, Lord, that we would rightly influence those 20 people, but allowing others to come in and out over time, and to be influenced by us, Lord, because that's what it is to proclaim the gospel, to allow your light to shine through us, to allow our light from you to influence others for your sake, for your glory. And so, God, even as we uh, try to take control, even as we try to live with that intentionality, and as we try to do more, like I talked about last week, with uh, with just giving all of ourselves to that. Let us remember that we can't give more than you have already given us, and that as we give of ourselves, we also need to realize that we are giving to you because you are more. That when we need to decrease, uh, let us do so, so that you may increase, not only in the presence in our lives, but that others may see you more than they see us, even in the things that we are doing for you. So again, God, we thank you for every word of the Bible, the words that challenge us beyond our understanding, the words that are so plainly spoken and plainly apparent on how we should live and what we should do, but also, Lord, for the examples of people like John, um, and so many others, but especially the example of Jesus, that we might rise up and live like he did for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, well, have a great evening. I'll have my videos on the Great Commission, and then the Great Commendation on Friday of this week, and then a message about being better together on Saturday, using Mother Teresa and others on Sunday, not Saturday, as an example. So you'll get to continue to see this face It was good to see some of your faces. It was good to see all the faces that I saw on Sunday, but I only got to see some of your faces. I should clarify that, right? So anyway, hope you all have a great night and a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to seeing as many as we can on Sunday. Take care.
Okay.